This is the Lee loader kit for 44 Magnum. Here's what's included in the kit. Decapping chamber, priming chamber and bullet seeder. This is the decapper. That's a powder measure. This is a sizing die and crimper. This is the priming rod. And this is a flaring tool. Okay, here are two items that are not included in the kit but are required. A soft-faced hammer and case lube. I also have a few optional items that I like to use. This is a case tray, holds 50 cases. This is a bullet box, holds 100 finished rounds. Scotch-Brite. This is a primer pocket cleaner. Digital powder scale. And a bullet puller. I like to reload 50 rounds at a time in stages. My first stage is to remove the spent primer, clean the primer pocket, and Scotch-Brite the case mouth. This is a typical fired case. There's the old primer. And you can see powder residue on the rim of the case. So I set the case on the decapping chamber with the primer over the hole. I use the decapper to force out the spent primer. You want to make sure your decapper is centered in the case. You can kind of feel it go into the primer hole. And there's your old primer. Once the old primer is out, you need to use either a small screwdriver or your primer pocket cleaner to clean out the primer pocket. And I'll just show you how much comes out over a clean spot on the table here. Now I'll use a piece of Scotch-Brite to clean up the powder residue on the mouth of the case. This is where I inspect the case, make sure there's no tears at the mouth. So once I do all these steps for 50 cases, then I'll move on to the next stage. The next stage for me is to lubricate, resize, and prime the cases. I apply the lube with my fingers. A little goes a long way. I'm going to take the lube case. I'm going to insert the lube case into the counterbore end of the sizing die. I'm going to hammer the case until it's flush with the die. It's important to get the case flush with the die so you don't have any trouble seating the primer. For 44 Magnum, this is going to take a little bit of hammering. Okay. Now I'm going to take a new primer. I'm going to put that in the priming chamber, make sure it's facing the correct way. I'm going to set the sizing die over the priming chamber. I'm going to use the priming rod to seat the primer. You'll want to check to make sure that the primer is below flush. With practice, you will be able to hear when you have the primer seated properly. Now I'm going to use the decapping chamber to protect the primer while I use the priming rod to knock the case out of the die. After I do about 10 rounds this way, I like to run a patch through the sizing die. So it does pick up some lube and some brass. The next stage of my process is to flare the case mouths. I like to lube the flaring tool with case lube. Place a sized and primed case in the decapping chamber to protect the primer. Set the flaring tool in the case. And give it a tap. Be careful not to use too much force. Here's a close-up of a flared case on the right compared to an unflared case on the left. Now I'm ready to charge the cases with powder, seat the bullet, and crimp the case. So this is a sized, primed, and flared case. I place the case in the decapping chamber to protect the primer. The resizing die fits over the case, and this end acts as a funnel for the powder. I selected a powder that is listed on the charge table that comes with the Lee loader kit. You want to make sure the powder measure will give you a safe load for the powder and bullet you choose. To double check my load, I went to the powder manufacturer's website and got the max min charge for my bullet weight and type. I verified that the Lee powder measure was within the safe range using a digital powder measure scale. I like to pour my powder into a largemouth container to use when I charge the cases. I also like to practice charging powder on my digital scale so that I have a consistent technique. Once the case is charged, it's time to seat the bullet. I like to use these copper-plated lead bullets with the cantilure groove. I feel the groove gives me a better crimp, and I get a visual indication that I have the bullet seated at the correct height. So I place the bullet in the sizing chamber. And I adjust the bullet seater intentionally shallow and gradually work up to the correct height. Adjust it some more. A little bit more. More adjustment will be there. I want to go a slight bit more. I'll try to adjust the bullet height so that the case mouth is in the middle of that cantilure groove. That's pretty good right there. You can measure the bullet length with a dial caliper or compare it to a factory-made round. Lee provides the max length on a card with the kit. A bullet puller comes in handy for when you accidentally set the bullet too deep in the case. Okay, we have the bullet seated at the correct height. Now we're going to put the case in the decapping chamber once again to protect the primer. We're going to use the funnel side of the sizing chamber to crimp the case to the bullet. I like to give the crimp chamber a good whack. .44 Magnum uses a heavy bullet and a lot of powder. I don't want the rounds to jump the crimp at the range. Here's a close-up of a crimped round on the right and an uncrimped round on the left. Now keep in mind the case OD is not supported when you're doing the crimping. So if you hammer too hard, you could bulge the case and cause it to not properly chamber. I like to wipe the excess lube off the case and inspect the round. I double check the case mount for tears. This one's ready to fire. Thanks for watching.